I never expected that a burst pipe in my best friend's apartment would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny how a mundane disaster, a catastrophe of plumbing and water damage, can end up being the single most important event of your entire existence. It can rearrange everything you thought you knew about yourself, about the person you cared for most, and about the quiet, unspoken spaces that exist between two people. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was 27, working as a freelance graphic designer from a small but sunny one-bedroom apartment. My life was a neat collection of routines: morning coffee, client emails, design work, an evening run, and maybe a movie before bed. It was predictable. It was safe. And, if I were being honest with myself in the dead of night, it was profoundly lonely. The one bright, chaotic exception to my orderly life was Caleb. We had been best friends since college, a strange and immediate pairing of opposites. I was the quiet, indoor kid who lived in Photoshop and meticulously organized my bookshelves by color. He was the one who seemed to have been carved from sunlight and sawdust, a furniture maker who could build a perfect dovetail joint with his eyes closed, and who always had a trace of wood smoke clinging to his clothes. He was, in my estimation, perfect. And he was, as far as I knew, perfectly straight. This was the central, unmovable fact of our friendship, a wall I had built around my own heart to keep things safe. I had packed away my feelings for him like old sweaters, stored in a box I promised myself I would never open. Loving him from a distance was better than not having him in my life at all. That was the bargain I'd made. So I watched. I was an expert observer of all things Caleb. I knew the way his brow furrowed when he was concentrating on a difficult piece of wood. I knew the specific, booming quality of his laugh when he found something genuinely hilarious. I knew he chewed on his lower lip when he was nervous, a detail I'd noticed he tried to hide. I collected these small moments, these tiny, insignificant details, and I treasured them in secret. Our own routine was sacred. Every Thursday night was movie night. He'd come over, we'd order pizza, and he'd complain about my choice of film, which was usually something quiet and character-driven. He'd lobby for an action movie with lots of explosions, and we'd compromise on a thriller. He'd stretch out on my couch, long legs dangling off the end, and I'd sit in the armchair, maintaining a safe and respectable distance. But I noticed things lately, or maybe I was just letting myself notice them. There was a new intensity to his gaze. Sometimes, during our movie nights, I'd feel his eyes on me, and when I'd glance over, he wouldn't look away immediately. He'd just hold my gaze for a beat too long, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression before he'd turn back to the screen, leaving me with a racing heart and 100 unanswerable questions. I told myself I was imagining it. It was wishful thinking, my lonely heart projecting its desires onto an innocent friendship. Caleb was just Caleb. He was friendly, tactile, and comfortable in his own skin. That's all it was. It had to be. To believe otherwise was to step onto a path that could only lead to heartbreak. And so, I kept my distance, I kept my secrets, and I cherished a friendship that felt like both a blessing and a curse. That Tuesday started like any other. The sky was a flat, uninspiring gray, and I was deep into a branding project for a new organic soap company. The work was tedious, demanding endless variations on the color green and fonts that were supposed to look like nature, but clean. I was lost in hex codes and vector paths when my phone buzzed, rattling against the wood of my desk. It was Caleb. His voice was strained, tight with a panic I had never heard from him before. "Lucas? Hey, you are not going to believe this." I could hear chaos in the background, shouting, the sound of rushing water. My stomach clenched. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Physically, I'm fine. My apartment, on the other hand, is currently auditioning to become an indoor swimming pool." He explained that a major water main on the floor above him had burst. Water was pouring through his ceiling, destroying drywall, wrecking his floors. His landlord was shutting off the water to the whole building, and the place was going to be uninhabitable for weeks, maybe longer. "Everything is soaked," he said, his voice dropping. "My couch, my books. God, I hope the stereo is okay." He sounded so lost, so uncharacteristically vulnerable. All the usual bravado was gone, stripped away by a torrent of dirty water from apartment 4B. And then came the question I was both dreading and desperately hoping for. He hesitated, and I could practically hear him running a hand through his already messy hair. Look, I know this is a massive thing to ask, and if it's not cool, just say so, no hard feelings. But, could I, maybe crash on your couch for a little while? Just until I figure something else out. I can pay rent, of course. My brain went into overdrive, a frantic balancing act between the friend who wanted to help and the man who was terrified of what this proximity would do to his carefully constructed defenses. Him here, in my space, every day, sleeping 20 feet from my bedroom. It was a beautiful, terrifying thought, but there was only one possible answer. You don't turn your back on your best friend. Of course, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Don't be ridiculous. The couch is yours for as long as you need it. The relief in his voice was a palpable thing, a wave of warmth that traveled through the phone. Dude, thank you. Seriously. You're a lifesaver. He said he just needed to grab a few things that weren't soaked, and he'd be over in an hour. After we hung up, I stood in the middle of my living room, staring at the couch. It was just a piece of furniture, gray fabric, and foam cushions. But it was about to become the epicenter of my world. My safe, quiet, orderly life was over. And a part of me, the part one refused to acknowledge, was absolutely thrilled. An hour later, he arrived at my door looking like a refugee from a storm. He had 2 duffel bags slung over his shoulder and a cardboard box in his arms. His hair was damp, his jeans were splattered with mud, and he looked utterly exhausted. But he still managed a weak smile when I opened the door. Worst moving day ever, he mumbled, stepping inside. I helped him with his bags, placing them by the couch. The reality of the situation began to sink in. He wasn't just visiting for a movie. He was living here. His stuff was now my stuff. His presence would fill every corner of my small apartment. I could already smell him, that familiar scent of sawdust, clean sweat, and something uniquely Caleb. It was overwhelming. Make yourself at home, I said, trying to sound casual. There are clean towels in the linen closet, and you can clear a shelf in the bathroom. I'll get some bedding for the couch. He just nodded, sinking onto the cushions and dropping his head into his hands. He looked so defeated. It was a side of him I rarely saw, the confident exterior washed away by circumstance. My instinct to comfort him was a physical ache. I wanted to sit next to him, put a hand on his back, tell him it would all be okay. But I couldn't. That was a line I wasn't allowed to cross. So instead, I busied myself with domestic tasks, pulling sheets and a heavy comforter from the closet. The mundane action grounded me, gave my nervous energy an outlet. That first night was a study in awkwardness. We ordered takeout, eating in near silence. The easy flow of our usual conversations was gone, replaced by a strange formality. We were both hyper-aware of the new arrangement, navigating the space around each other like strangers. When it was time for bed, I showed him how the couch worked and then retreated to my room, closing the door and leaning against it, my heart pounding. I could hear him moving around, the soft rustle of sheets, a quiet cough. I was intensely aware of his presence just on the other side of the wall. Sleep felt like an impossibility. I was lying in my bed, wide awake, picturing him sleeping on my couch, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that these next few weeks were going to either save me or break me completely. The first few days of living together settled into a strange new rhythm. It was a dance of proximity and avoidance. We'd bump into each other in the small kitchen in the mornings, a flurry of mumbled apologies and awkward sidesteps. I learned that he was not a morning person. He moved like a bear disturbed from hibernation, grunting his way to the coffee pot I now prepared for 2. He spent most of his days on the phone with insurance adjusters and his landlord, his voice a low, frustrated rumble that became the new soundtrack to my apartment. I'd sit at my desk, trying to focus on work, but my ears were always tuned to him, to the rise and fall of his exasperation. It was an odd kind of intimacy, being privy to the frustrating minutiae of his life. But as the days bled into a week, something began to shift. The initial awkwardness started to soften at the edges, replaced by a comfortable domesticity. I'd come out of my office to find he had done the dishes I'd left in the sink. He started tidying up the living room, folding the blanket on the couch with a surprising neatness. He was trying, in his own way, to be a good house guest, to not impose. It was in these small, shared moments that I started to see sides of him I'd never known. One evening, I was struggling with a logo design, frustrated and ready to throw my laptop out the window. Caleb came over and peered at my screen. He was quiet for a long moment, just observing. "What if you tried moving that element just a little to the left?" he asked, pointing a finger at the screen. "And maybe make the line weight a bit thinner? It feels a little heavy." I was taken aback. I followed his suggestion, and to my astonishment, it worked. The whole design clicked into place. "How did you know that?" I asked, looking up at him. He just shrugged, a faint blush on his cheeks. "I don't know. I work with lines and balance all day. Just a feeling, I guess." It was the first time I realized his artistry wasn't confined to wood. He had an innate sense of aesthetics that I, the professional designer, had completely overlooked. This was when my perception of him really began to change. He wasn't just the handsome, easygoing jock I'd always painted him as in my mind. He was thoughtful. He was observant. He had a quiet depth I was only just beginning to discover. The wall I had built around my heart was starting to develop tiny, hairline cracks. The most significant moment, the one that really signaled a change, happened about a week and a half into his stay. I had a collection of old sketchbooks from my college days tucked away on a high shelf. I never showed them to anyone. They were deeply personal, filled with half-formed ideas, anatomical studies, and emotional, abstract drawings from a time when I was still figuring myself out. I came home from a grocery run to find Caleb sitting on the floor, one of my sketchbooks open in his lap. My blood ran cold. I felt completely exposed, as if he were reading my private diary. I almost snatched it away, but the look on his face stopped me. He wasn't mocking or confused. He was utterly captivated. He slowly turned a page, his fingers tracing the edge of a charcoal drawing of a pair of hands. "Lucas," he said, his voice soft with something that sounded like awe. "These are incredible. Why have you never shown me these?" He looked up at me, and his eyes were so genuine, so full of sincere admiration, that all my defensiveness melted away. "They're just old sketches," I stammered, feeling my face flush. "It's nothing, really." He shook his head, closing the book gently and placing it on the coffee table as if it were a precious artifact. "No, it's not nothing," he said, standing up. "It's you. It's a part of you I've never seen before. It's amazing." He said it with such simple, profound conviction. In that moment, I felt seen by him in a way I had never felt seen by anyone. He didn't bring it up again, but something had been unlocked between us. A new layer of understanding. He had seen a hidden, vulnerable part of me and hadn't shied away. He had embraced it. The polite distance we had maintained was dissolving, replaced by a warmth that was both comforting and terrifying. He started making me coffee in the mornings, remembering that I liked just a splash of oat milk and no sugar. When he saw my favorite brand of tea was running low, a new box appeared on the counter the next day. These were small things, tiny gestures of care, but they accumulated in my heart like stones, weighing it down with a hope I was too scared to name. The friendship I was so desperate to protect was changing into something deeper, something more complicated, and I had no idea how to stop it. The staring had also returned, but it was different now. It was no longer just a fleeting glance during a movie. It was sustained. I'd be at my desk, and I'd feel his eyes on me from the couch. I'd be washing dishes, and I'd see his reflection in the window over the sink, just watching me. When I would catch him, he'd offer a small, shy smile and then look away, as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. Each time it happened, my insides would twist into a knot of hope and fear. What did it mean? Was he just curious about the life of a quiet designer? Or was it something more? My mind became a battleground, with every small interaction being dissected and analyzed for hidden meaning. I was losing my grip on the careful control I'd maintained for years. Living with him was like living with the sun in my small apartment. I was drawn to the warmth, terrified of getting burned. The turning point came on a miserable, rainy Saturday. The world outside was awash of gray, and a dull, persistent headache that had been buzzing behind my eyes all morning had blossomed into a full-blown migraine. It was a bad one. The light from my laptop screen felt like daggers, and every sound, from the drip of the faucet to the hum of the refrigerator, was amplified into a painful roar. I finally gave up trying to work, closing my laptop and pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. "You okay?" Caleb's voice came from the couch, sounding distant and distorted. I shook my head, which was a mistake. The movement sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Migraine, I managed to whisper. A really bad one. Without another word, I stumbled to my bedroom and crawled under the covers, pulling the pillow over my head to block out the slivers of light coming through the blinds. This was my usual routine for a migraine. Retreat into darkness and silence, and wait for the storm in my head to pass. I expected Caleb to just leave me alone, to maybe watch TV with headphones on. That's what anyone else would do. But a few minutes later, my bedroom door creaked open. I flinched at the sound. I heard his soft footsteps on the floor, and then the gentle rustle as he pulled my blackout curtains completely closed, plunging the room into a deep, comforting darkness. He moved around quietly, his presence a silent comfort. I heard the click of a glass being set on my nightstand. "I brought you some water," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't move from under my pillow. "Thanks," I mumbled. I expected him to leave then, to retreat and give me my space. But he didn't. Instead, I felt the mattress dip as he sat down on the edge of my bed. My entire body went rigid. "My mom used to get these," he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "They looked awful." I still didn't move. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic counter-rhythm to the pulsing pain in my skull. What was he doing? This was my room, my bed, my private space of pain and retreat. His presence here felt like a profound violation of the rules we had always silently obeyed. And then I felt his hand. It was hesitant at first, a light touch on my shoulder through the comforter. When I didn't pull away, his fingers moved to my neck, gently brushing my hair aside. His touch was warm and sure. He began to massage the tense muscles at the base of my skull, his thumb finding the exact point of agonizing tension and pressing with a firm, steady pressure. A small, involuntary sound escaped my throat. The pain didn't vanish, but the sharp edges of it began to soften under his touch. It was the most incredible relief. He shifted closer, his other hand coming up to gently cradle my head. His fingers began to work at my temples in slow, deliberate circles. I finally dared to pull the pillow off my face, turning my head to the side, giving him better access. My eyes were closed, but I was more aware of him than I had ever been of anything in my life. The world shrank to the space of my bed. There was only the darkness, the sound of the rain against the window, and the feeling of his hands on me. His touch wasn't clinical or platonic. It was impossibly gentle. It was intimate. He said nothing, and neither did I. We existed in this bubble of quiet, focused care for what felt like an eternity. He was tending to my pain with a tenderness I had never imagined I would receive from anyone, least of all from him. I must have drifted off at some point, lulled into a fragile sleep by the rhythm of his hands and the receding tide of pain. When I woke up, the room was completely dark, and the rain had stopped. My head felt sore and bruised, but the sharp, splitting agony was gone. I was alone in the bed. For a moment, I wondered if I had dreamed it, if the feverish pain of the migraine had conjured a fantasy of him caring for me. But then I saw it. The glass of water was still on my nightstand, and next to it, a small bottle of aspirin and a neatly folded, cool, damp washcloth. He had been here. It was real, and with that realization, a new kind of ache settled in my chest, one that had nothing to do with a migraine. It was a potent mix of gratitude, confusion, and a dangerous, soaring hope. Something had fundamentally changed between us in the darkness of my room. The line I had so carefully drawn had not just been crossed, it had been erased completely, and I had no idea what to do next. The next morning, the apartment was filled with a thick, unspoken tension. It was like the air pressure had dropped, charging everything with a static electricity that made my skin prickle. When I emerged from my room, feeling groggy but human again, Caleb was already in the kitchen, staring into a coffee mug as if it held the secrets of the universe. He looked up when I came in, and his eyes darted away almost immediately. "Hey," he said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet space. "Feeling better?" I nodded, my own voice feeling foreign in my throat. "Yeah, much better. Thanks for yesterday." "No problem," he said quickly, turning his back to me to rinse his mug in the sink. The gesture felt like a wall being thrown up. He was closing himself off. The easy intimacy of the day before was gone, replaced by this brittle, awkward distance. We moved around each other, making breakfast in a silence that was heavier and more profound than any silence we had ever shared before. My mind was a chaotic mess. I spent the entire day replaying the events in my room over and over again. I analyzed every touch, every moment of silence. Was it just an act of kindness? Was he just being a good friend, taking care of me in a moment of vulnerability? My rational brain insisted that this was the most likely explanation. He was a good guy. Of course, he would help a sick friend. But another part of me, the hopeful, foolish part, couldn't let it go. The tenderness in his touch had felt like more than just friendship. The way he had stayed with me, the quiet dedication of his care, felt personal, profound. Had I imagined it? Had I projected my own feelings onto his actions, seeing what I so desperately wanted to see? The uncertainty was agonizing. For the next 2 days, we lived like polite ghosts in the same apartment. The comfortable domesticity we had built was shattered. The shared jokes, the easy conversation, the lingering gazes, it all vanished. Caleb seemed determined to make himself as small as possible. He spent hours at his workshop, coming back late at night, long after I had retreated to my room. When he was in the apartment, he had headphones on, his attention fixed on his phone or a book. He was avoiding me. There was no other word for it. And with every hour that passed, my hope withered and my fear grew. I had made him uncomfortable. My quiet pining had somehow become obvious, and his act of kindness had been misinterpreted by me. He was probably regretting it, wishing he'd just left me alone with my migraine. The thought made my stomach hurt. I was going to lose my best friend because I couldn't control my own stupid heart. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I braced myself for the conversation where he would gently tell me he was going to go stay with another friend, that my apartment was too small, that he needed more space. I rehearsed my response, how I would pretend to understand, how I would make it easy for him, how I would smile and say it was no problem while my world fell apart. The overthinking was relentless. I'd lie awake at night, staring at my ceiling, tracing the path his hands had taken on my skin, trying to decipher their meaning. One moment, I'd be filled with a dizzying certainty that he felt something, too. The memory of his gentle touch would feel like undeniable proof. But then, doubt would creep in, a cold and logical voice that told me I was a fool. He was straight. He was being kind. I was creating a fantasy. This back and forth was exhausting, leaving me emotionally raw and perpetually on edge. I knew I couldn't live like this, in this limbo of unspoken tension. Something had to give. I considered trying to talk to him, to clear the air. But what would I even say? Hey, thanks for taking care of me the other day. By the way, was that a just friend's head rub, or was it something more? The absurdity and horror of that potential conversation kept me silent. So I waited. I waited for him to make the first move, to either retreat completely or give me some sign, any sign, that what had happened between us in the dark had meant something to him, too. The silence in the apartment grew louder every day, a testament to everything we weren't saying. I was terrified of the answer, but the not knowing was somehow even worse. The breaking point came on Tuesday night, exactly 1 week after the migraine. Caleb came home late from the workshop, smelling of cedar and exhaustion. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book, but really I was just listening for the sound of his key in the lock. He dropped his bag by the door with a heavy thud and walked into the kitchen without a word. I heard him open the fridge, the clink of a bottle, and then silence. I kept my eyes fixed on the page in front of me, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. This was the moment. I could feel it. The tension had been stretched so thin that it had to snap. He walked into the living room and didn't sit on the couch. Instead, he just stood in the middle of the room, holding a beer, looking at me. I finally forced myself to look up from my book. His expression was one I had never seen before. He looked nervous, exhausted, and incredibly sad. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and rough. My stomach plummeted. I closed my book, marking my page with a hand that was trembling slightly. I nodded, unable to form words. This was the conversation I had been dreading. He was going to let me down easy, create the distance he so clearly wanted. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, staring at the floor for a long moment before his eyes met mine again. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry for being so weird the last few days. I've been a total ass. I shook my head. No, you haven't. It's fine. It was a lie, and we both knew it. No, it's not fine, he insisted, taking a step closer. I freaked out. Lucas, he took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into icy water. When you had that migraine, when I was in your room, something happened. For me, I felt something, and it scared the hell out of me. The air left my lungs in a rush. I stared at him, trying to process his words. He felt something. It wasn't just me. My carefully constructed narrative of rejection and misunderstanding began to crumble. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was deeply agitated. I've been confused for a long time, he continued, his voice barely a whisper now. About a lot of things. About myself. And being here, with you, all the time, it's made everything so much clearer and so much more confusing at the same time. He looked right at me, his eyes wide and vulnerable. The confident, self-assured Caleb was gone. In his place was someone I felt I was seeing for the very first time. The way I look at you. I know you've noticed. I've been trying to stop, trying to pretend. I kept telling myself it was just because we're best friends. But it's not, is it? It was a rhetorical question, but it hung in the air between us, filled with years of unspoken feelings. Caleb, I started, but I didn't know what to say. My mind was blank, filled only with the roaring sound of hope in my ears. He took another step, closing the distance between us until he was standing right in front of my armchair. He knelt down, so our faces were level. When I was taking care of you, he said, his voice thick with emotion, all I could think about was how much I wanted to protect you, how much I wanted to just be with you, not just as a friend. And when you fell asleep, I just sat there for an hour, just watching you, and I realized, I've been pretending for years. Pretending I didn't see the way you look at me sometimes. Pretending I didn't feel this pull towards you. Pretending I knew who I was. And I'm so tired of pretending. Tears pricked at my eyes. All the years of hiding, of longing, of convincing myself it was impossible, were unwinding in the space of a single confession. He had seen me all along. He had felt it, too. I thought I was imagining it. I whispered, my voice breaking. I thought it was just me. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before he gently cupped my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, and the touch was electric. It was a confirmation of everything he had just said. It was never just you, he said softly. His eyes searched mine, asking a silent question. And in that moment, all my fear vanished, replaced by a certainty that was as profound and undeniable as the ground beneath my feet. I leaned forward, closing the small gap between us, and pressed my lips against his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question. But then he sighed into my mouth, a sound of surrender and relief, and his hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. It wasn't a frantic, desperate kiss. It was slow and deep and full of 1,000 conversations we had never had. It tasted of salt and beer and years of pent-up hope. It was a kiss that said, finally. When we finally broke apart, we rested our foreheads together, both of us breathing heavily. So, he murmured, a shaky smile playing on his lips. I guess my couch is pretty comfortable. I let out a laugh that was half a sob. Never mind the couch, I said, my hand finding his. You can stay as long as you want. For the first time, in my apartment, in my life, everything felt completely, perfectly, in the right place. The weeks that followed the confession were like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world of vibrant color. The tension that had filled the apartment was gone, replaced by a giddy, joyful energy. We were navigating a new landscape, charting the territory between best friends and something more. It was awkward and clumsy and absolutely wonderful. Our first official date was to a small, independent movie theater, the kind I loved and he usually just tolerated. But this time, as the lights went down, he didn't just sit next to me. He reached over and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. We sat like that for the entire 2 hours, his thumb drawing lazy circles on my skin. I don't remember a single thing about the movie we watched. I just remember the warmth of his hand in mine. Living together was no longer a dance of avoidance, but a dance of discovery. I learned that he hummed, off-key, when he was making coffee. He learned that I couldn't sleep without the window being cracked open, even in the winter. We fell into a domestic rhythm that felt less like a temporary arrangement and more like a foundation. My quiet, orderly life was now filled with the sound of his laughter, the scent of his sawdust, and the comfortable, solid presence of him next to me on the couch, a couch he rarely slept on anymore. His apartment was eventually repaired, the landlord calling to say he could move back in. We both looked at each other when he got the news, a silent, mutual panic in our eyes. The thought of him leaving, of going back to separate apartments and scheduled movie nights, felt unbearable. "You don't have to go," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I mean, unless you want to." A slow grin spread across his face. "My lease is up in 2 months anyway," he said, stepping closer and wrapping his arms around my waist. "Seems like a waste of money to pay rent on 2 places, doesn't it?" And just like that, it was decided. His temporary stay became a permanent one. He moved his remaining things not back to his old apartment, but into mine, into ours. A few months later, I came home to find him assembling something in the living room. It was a bookshelf, crafted from a beautiful, dark walnut wood, with elegant, clean lines that perfectly matched my aesthetic. It was designed to fit a specific, awkward wall in my apartment, a space I had never been able to figure out what to do with. He had built it for me, for us. As I watched him work, his brow furrowed in that familiar look of concentration, my heart felt full to bursting. All those years I had spent watching him from a distance, loving him in secret, I thought I was protecting myself. But self-protection can so easily become a cage. I had been living a half-life, too afraid to risk the friendship for the possibility of something more. That burst pipe had been a random act of chaos, an accident that forced our lives to collide. But what happened after was a choice. He chose to stop pretending, and I chose to be brave enough to believe him. Life is not a series of grand, dramatic gestures. It's a collection of small moments, quiet observations, and unspoken truths. Sometimes, you just need a little disaster to finally force you to say them out loud. And sometimes, the person you think is a world away has been standing right beside you the whole time, just waiting for you to see them. Truly see them.